You are watching Co-op for Two, broadcasting live from Champaign, Illinois, July 9th, 2023, Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. And we are here to play in quotes, Dear Holmes. We've got our solution for the case of the Fickle Fiancés. We've played 4 weeks previous, going through the 4 letters of the case. We've come up with our theories for the most part. Today we're going to talk a little bit about those, any remaining questions we haven't answered. Then we're going to read the solution from Sherlock Holmes, and then we're going to talk about that. We can spend as much time as the group wants talking. And then again, next week we'll start a new case. Okay, but before we get started, let's just do any bookkeeping here. I can see the chat is working. Everything seems to be fine. We've got the group here. YouTube says there are only 7 people here, so we've got a small group. The chat is talking about some of the remaining questions that are still sort of lingering. Before we get into that, let me just do a little bit of bookkeeping. On Friday we played a game by Cryptic Killers called Murder at Merivale Manor, not Merivale Mansion. And it took us about 7.5 hours, and it was really surprisingly good. Probably my favorite game in the Cryptic Killers series, which is a very good series. So if you haven't watched that video, maybe don't watch it. Maybe consider going out and buying that game. You can get it on Amazon for about 20 bucks, which is a bargain. And you can watch the stream afterwards, but some of the same group that played it with me on Friday is here today, and I think we all really enjoyed it. Although some people, Jonathan did, well, it wasn't Jonathan's favorite, but it was the favorite of a bunch of people. Another little piece of bookkeeping is, as you know, I've subscribed to Deadbolt Mystery Society. We've played a bunch. We've played 10 of the Deadbolt Mystery Society narrative puzzle games on the channel. I've done 2 reviews, roundup reviews of those 5. But I've made it clear that I think if you can get the games on a deep sale, then there might be worth buying new. And they did have a pretty big sale for the subscription, so I subscribed to it. So in addition to the backlog of boxes, we're now going to be getting new boxes delivered. And I think my current thinking is that we'll try to play those with very short notice as soon as they arrive. Either the day they arrive, maybe we'll play them, or the day after. That's my current thinking. That means you won't have much heads up. And we'll be playing them before we know the difficulty, but maybe there'll be some fun in that. All right, anything else to talk about before we get started? Okay, the channel is talking about our theories, our unanswered questions. We have a list of the official questions. So before we open today's mail, let's talk a little bit about some of the unresolved questions we have. The chat is already talking about some of them. Macon says, do we know what the Jabberwocky quote was about? We don't. My gut was that the Jabberwocky quote, which is from Lewis Carroll, maybe we should have spent more attention looking at it, but it was mostly a nonsense quote. But if you'll remember, that quote was on the card with the lilies, right? And let's just bring it up here. That card was on the quote with the lilies, which we don't think is from McBain, the writer, the newspaper guy who's often quoting his favorite poet, Burns. And I think, if I had to guess, that the game has thrown that at us as a little distraction to see if we don't get tripped up to thinking that the same person is writing both notes. That's my guess. My guess is that we've got these weird quotes from McBain that tie us to certain things, and that one isn't. But maybe we could, if we thought about it more, maybe we could better connect that with the people who are sending that card. Although we have a fairly strong suspicion that those cards are being sent by the Club Coast people who are trying to extort Dalton to stop talking about temperance. Now, I did want to address that slightly with one piece of evidence. So I reread the papers. Over the break between last week, someone found a really nice connection that confirmed one of our strong theories. I think it was Antina. Correct me if I'm wrong. It could have been Rob. I think it was Antina. But if you'll remember, on the last letter, we got Ruth Dresser as our proxy, went to the newspaper again. She tried to dig up information about Lillian's death, which she did. And when she went to McBain's newspaper, The Mirror, he found her obituary note. And when we read that, first of all, it had a quote from Burns. It was signed LM, didn't have her actual signature in it. And that really made us very highly suspicious. We came to the conclusion that, yes, the reporter McBain did kill her, did push her off the bridge. We got confirmation she died drowning off the bridge. Maybe she was pushed. So the nature of that suicide note really made us think, okay, it's McBain. But I believe it was Antina that put the nail in that coffin after we filmed that discussion by finding this. He finds the suicide note, and he says, I got to see it myself. It was just a small scrap of it. It was on a scrap of yellow paper, short but touching, I suppose. Okay, we read that, we thought nothing of it. And then what was pointed out was that when we meet McBain in a previous letter, he leaves his notepad in front of us. He leaves his notepad on the desk when he meets with us, and that's when we get a little scrap of paper from it. And what do we see? Let's see if we can find it. Yes, okay. McBain left his notebook and pencil. I knew he would soon realize. I hurriedly flipped through the puckered canary-colored pages to no avail. So actually, a very clever use of telling us the color of the pages in two different ways. In our last letter, that there's a yellow suicide note. Here, canary-colored notebook. So clearly the suicide note was written on McBain's notebook. And if you remember, the week before that, we had this great, interesting discussion about the encrypted note that was found, tracings of, imprints of in McBain's notebook that told Lily to meet from Dalton, that said, meet me on the bridge. And we had our initial theory that McBain had discovered this note and thus discovered the affair and made a copy of it. But then why wasn't it in the notebook? And then the genius idea that was come up with in the channel. I forget who first proposed it, either Rob or maybe it was Rob, who said, I have a better theory. That's not the note from Dalton that McBain discovered to figure out the affair. It's the note that McBain wrote to set up Lily, making it appear that Dalton had written her a note to meet her at the bridge. And that's what he used to lure her to the bridge and then killed her. Not sure why he has to lure her to a public place, but maybe he wants to make it look like an accident. Anyway, that seems all but confirmed. So those aren't the unresolved issues, though. We do have a couple of unresolved issues. I want to start with that last one about the extortion notes. So he's been getting these notes in his hospital bed with a bouquet of lilies saying, the last note said, "Careful or all will know of L," and then they didn't see the rest of it. So it's, and then the other letter seemed to suggest, the other card all seemed to suggest that he was being blackmailed to not talk about, to be careful, otherwise someone was going to reveal what they know, that he was having an affair with Lily. We think he's a politician. We know he knew her in the past. We think he was seeing her. So if it came out that he was seeing Lily on the side having an affair, it would hurt his reputation. And we think the people who have the best motive to extort him are Sunny Mags and Vesta, who run this Club Coast. The only thing that's slightly weird that I wanted to draw our attention to is this tension between Sunny Mags and Vesta. When we meet them, Vesta slips Dalton an oyster in public, which embarrasses Sunny Mags a little bit. We sort of know what that's about. And then Dalton says, "Oh, Sunny Mags adores Vesta like I adore you." But it's a weird relationship with Sunny Mags and Vesta, and in the last letter, we get a very odd scene, and I wanted us to revisit that. So, our girl Ruth goes back in there to Sunny Mags, who runs the club. And she gives him this fake story that Holmes told her to give, saying, "Hey, all's forgiven. I'm an emissary of Dalton. Let's call a truce. He's gonna call off the dogs about temperance. Everything's fine." And then she says, "Okay, now that I've told you that, let me ask you honestly, did you try to hurt Dalton with this diamond ring, this fake diamond ring?" And when we do, Mag says, "Get Vesta now." Okay, so they're not like an equal relationship couple. Vesta is a subordinate here. He says, "Get Vesta." And then he has this interesting interaction with her. He says, "I did see her feed him that oyster, and I thought it was pretty crass, and I told her so, but this is going too far." Vesta comes in and she sits down like a little femme fatale here. She sits down lighting a cigarette as if she's the only person in the room. So we're getting a little bit of a flavor here that Vesta may be a little bit of a wild card who's not going to be bossed around by anyone. He walks up to her. He takes her left hand and he says, what happened to the ring? Just the ring. She says, she takes it back, ignoring him, lights her cigarette. She says, "The stone was a hunk of glass anyway." And then he taps his ring finger to her and he says, "Vesta, dear, how did you dispose of that little bauble?" And then she laughs at him and she says, "You wanted something Ward would remember, didn't you?" Then he shakes his head and he says, you do realize you nearly killed him?" And then he tells her, "Get out." She leaves and he apologizes. And then he says he wants Dalton to know he had no part of that. Then he says to her, "You should ask your fiancé about his past loss." Okay, so we don't know what's the deal with this past loss. It's not clear to us what ring this is. Is he just saying what happened to the ring you used to wear? That has nothing to do with anything, but it's on her ring finger. Is he implying that Vesta used to be engaged to Dalton? And then she's saying that Mags ordered her to do something he would remember. So we're not clear whose ring this is. And why does she have some tie to Dalton that we don't know? Someone mentioned to us, the reporter mentioned to us, that Ruth is his current fiancée. So we were thinking, who is his past fiancée that the reporter is alluding to? Is it Lily who died? Is it Vesta? It's not clear to us. That's a bit of a mystery to us. And then he says, okay, let's just make peace, take the pot off the boil before it hurts someone. And he says, if Dalton has to do the March of Decency, it's not the end of the world. Okay, then there's one more thing that I think is interesting that we missed. That might be significant. So Ruth is I want your opinion on this. Ruth is about to leave, and she pulls out the code to show him. She shows him the code, and he says, yeah, it's called the Coast Code. It's a club code. She asks him to decode it. Okay. When we read that, we thought that's exactly what we expected. We had already figured out it was a Coast Code, all that. He says it's easy to learn. But there was something we sort of glanced by. And that is, she's not just showing him arbitrary code. It tells us what piece of encoded message she shows him. She shows him the florist's card. The florist's card is the one that says, be careful or all will know about Lillian. We think that Sonny Mags and Vesta, and if Sonny Mags is the boss, it's really Sonny Mags we're talking about, who cares about the club. So she's showing him the note that we think he wrote. And let's look at his reaction. She says, look familiar. He took it between his fingers, shook his head, and returned it. That almost sounds like he's looking at it and saying, ugh, Vesta is doing this. She's out of control. Or one of my people is getting ahead of their skis. He's not looking at it and getting like, oh my God, she's seen the note. He's not looking at it and getting nervous. He's looking at it as if he didn't write it. That concerns me because our theory is that that's from the blackmailer extortionists, which is him. Vesta doesn't have an interest in protecting the club on her own. So that throws me. That really throws me. He looks at it, he shakes his head. He doesn't seem like he's been caught. This gives me a little bit of concern that there are some theories last week that is Vesta working with McBain? I think Vesta's sort of on her own. So I'm a little nervous now about the idea that the extortionist letters are from Sonny Mags. I'm wondering now, is it possible that Sonny Mags was not extorting him? And that this is all Vesta, who's angry about him trying to get married to Ruth? And is somehow telling him to break it off? I mean, she's saying, be careful. The extortion note says, be careful. It doesn't say break it off. So that troubles me. And I also want to draw your attention to this part here, where we talk to McBain's editor again, and he says, I'm not sure. We ask about the David McBain and Lily about to be married. He says, well, I'm not sure they were officially a couple. I'm not sure their engagement was formal. We just assumed they were a couple. And then he says, she was an actress, very pretty. One must wonder what Lillian Newton saw in McBain. Perhaps free publicity. But he's a political reporter. And I was starting to think, Jonathan proposed an idea before about, is it possible that Lillian and our guy Dalton weren't having an affair? Dalton says they weren't having an affair. When confronted, he says, look, we were just old friends. I got to know her when they'd come into the club. She's an actress. She was a dear friend. That's all. People thought we had a romantic relationship, especially McBain. That's why he's mad. But I broke it off when we got engaged. Actually, I see now. Right. Ceased contact. This is a lie. We know this is a lie because we know he's got a letter from her. But I heard she was doing well, engaged to star in The Orchid. But I started to think, maybe, is it possible that Dalton was using Lillian to dig up political dirt from McBain? Like, did he have a relationship with her where her deal was she was going to sleep with McBain in order to steal his notes, to get notes, to dig up political dirt on rivals to help his politics? I do think that's less likely, though, than that he's having an affair. And why wouldn't he tell his wife if that's what he was doing? And here he's clearly lying. He says he ceased contact with her, but we know he got a note from her that said David knows. All right, let me check in with the chat a little bit more. My theory is that Sonny and Vesta knew about the affair, didn't realize David killed Lily, so they assumed she killed herself and used that to try to blackmail him. Feeding him the diamond was Vesta's own idea that Sonny didn't know about, probably symbolizes faithlessness. Past loss, Debbie says, I don't have any idea. It's weird, though, that Sonny Maggs is clearly the boss and runs the club, but he's talking down to Vesta like she's subordinate. So does she care about blackmailing him to shut up about the club? It's weird. Macon says, I do think Vesta used to be engaged to Dalton, and that explains the tensions between Sonny and Vesta, and it would explain why Vesta took a personal interest in punishing Dalton. I think that makes some sense. Veggie Dog says, I do think the past loss is Vesta calling off her past engagement with Dalton after finding out he was a cheater and he had given her a fake diamond engagement ring. Okay. Debbie says, we thought the extortion note was regarding Dalton's temperance activity. I still think that's the most likely idea. That is the most likely case. I'm just raising the possibility that Sonny Maggs seems a little bit surprised. He's not exactly surprised about it, but he's shaking his head as if, oh my God, Vesta is out of control. And maybe she is. Maybe she's taken it on herself to be writing these notes. Is it possible that Vesta is trying to get him to break up with Ruth, independent of blackmail about the club? Is it possible that we're misreading Sonny Maggs? Sonny Maggs is an interesting character. He doesn't seem to be lying and deceiving people about things. He's very upfront about how Dalton's going to hurt his business and he's not going to take it lying down. He's very upfront about not trying to hurt Dalton with the ring. I wonder. Debbie says, I guess the blackmail could have been all Vesta's idea. She is very close to Sonny after all. It almost feels like Vesta is the brains behind the extortion and Sonny doesn't even know about it. John Kingsbury suspects Dalton of planting the yellow note. I do not think so. I think you are overthinking that. Okay, what are our other unresolved questions? We went over the ring, whose ring it is. We seem to be coalescing on the theory that Vesta and Dalton were engaged in the past. We're sort of split on the extortion. Maybe we're leaning to Vesta being sort of off on her own. What's the term for when someone's going off independent, doing stuff? One of the things that Jonathan Warner was bothered by in the third letter was how confident Dalton was that he wasn't going to get in trouble from all this. Like, they're trying to blackmail him and extort him, and he seems like, no big deal. I'm going to turn this all to my advantage. Where is he saying that? He says, despite my assurances to Dalton, this is what I feel, I have doubts about our future, yet regardless of what life may bring me, I do not wish him undue harm. He seems to be convinced of his plan, so much so that he worries not a whit about the danger he's attracting. And then here he is talking about, okay. I told him I would like nothing better. So actually, Ruth suggests to him that Vesta and Mags are threatening to tell the police he was a patron of the club. So she's actually raising it right here. Hey, they're going to tell people that you're drinking at this club while pretending to be for temperance. And they've already talked to McBain. You're going to be ruined. And then here's what she says. To my surprise, he let out a smile. And he says, that's the genius of my plan. That poor excuse for a reporter wants to dishonor my name with veiled innuendos and exaggerated charges, but he knows nothing. I'll turn the table on him, on all of them, because I'm a new man capable of fighting immorality because I have conquered it in myself. I must seize my past and wield it if I am to succeed in the future. So this is weird. Now, we should say we believe that Dalton was having this whole double life, drinking at the club. I think we're all fairly convinced of that, and that it wasn't all a plan, and Dalton is this sort of lying double life politician. But remember, one of the questions is, why is the pin and the note in the fireplace? So if our theory is right, that went into the fireplace the day that Lillian was killed by McBain. That all happened, we now find out, on May 2nd, which was, I don't know, 2 weeks ago. So I think a fair way to read this is that 2 weeks ago, Lily is killed by McBain. And Dalton, at that point, 2 weeks ago, drops his past. Like 2 weeks ago, he stops going to the club. We don't know this for sure, but this is my guess, that 2 weeks ago, he stops going to the club. He fixes, he drops his old ways. So maybe he's just saying, hey, look, I'm a new man capable of fighting immorality because I've conquered it in myself. 2 weeks ago. I mean, he's saying it as if it was years ago, but I think maybe he is saying that he's genuinely was shook by Lily's death, and now he's gonna turn the tables on all these people, and he really has left all that behind. And he's figured out now that McBain killed Lily. And so maybe he really does feel like it's now his mission to combat all this stuff. It's just a little bit troubling that he says he knows nothing. I'll turn the table on him. Maybe he's probably saying he's going to turn the table and tell people that McBain killed Lily. I'm a little bit concerned about it, though. He's planning to say they led him astray at his lowest point because now he's reformed and can speak out about the Coast Club. That's right. Veggie Dog says it's definitely possible that Vesta's doing 100% of the blackmail. If she and Sonny are to be married, Club Coast being shut down hurts her as much as him. He knows Lily's death isn't his fault if he's aware that she's murder. And our theory now is that McBain told him that he killed her. So I think that it makes sense that he could turn the tables on McBain. The only thing that I'm a little nervous about here is if he really wasn't dating Lillian, if he was using her for information, then that would be a real reason why he would be so confident. Like, hey, I haven't really been having an affair. I haven't really been going to this club drinking. I've been using it to collect information about others in politics. But I don't think that seems likely, and I don't think we have any direct evidence for that. We don't have any hints that Dalton has all this information about his political opponents, right? Like, we're just told that Dalton is a politician. We're not told he's some super politician running for president that has all this information. And Debbie says, the idea of Lily getting engaged to David just for the sake of getting his newspaper info seems extreme. I think I would agree with you, especially because as a sort of spycraft, you could date a government office to get inside information that was harmful to someone, but you don't really have to date a newspaper writer to get access to the inside dirt on people, because presumably he's going to write about it. If he's collecting the dirt, it's going to make its way into the newspaper, so you don't have to steal it so much. Which gives me an excuse to recommend one of my favorite movies of all time, Day of the Jackal, the original Zinnemann film from the 60s. If you haven't seen it, it's one of my very favorite movies. Okay, so I guess we've covered the romantic affair with Lily. Are they really having an affair? I believe they are. I believe Dalton, everything we know about Dalton is he's a lying, scheming politician who's been drinking on the side. I've presented my concerns about Mag's reaction when shown the note. We think his previous fiancée was not Lily now, but Vesta. Is that right? I think that's what I'm coming to. All right, let's look at our original questions, formulate answers to them, and then if anyone has any other things they want to talk about, issues they're concerned about, we can do that before we read the letter. But let us see what Watson told us we were to answer from this case, which we got a month ago. Over a month ago. 1. Is Mr. Ward the victim of an attack? Remember, he got coughed up blood and everything. If so, exactly how was the crime executed? I do believe he's in peril, yet the nature of the threat eludes me. Okay, so our answer to number 1 is that he was fed the fake diamond by Vesta. That's what triggered his ulcers, cut into his stomach, made him cough up blood. It wasn't really an attempt to poison him or kill him. Maybe Vesta didn't even know about his ulcers. His ulcers may, in fact, have to do with Lillian's death a couple weeks ago and the police suspecting him, etc. But not exactly an attack to kill him, but an attack from Vesta, which otherwise known as Miss Victoria. Either some combination of personal animus from her and an attempt to get him to back off from the club. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. Question 2. Who would have a strong motive to harm Mr. Ward, and could there have been any accomplices? Again, this is a little odd given the nature of his non-food poisoning. But to rephrase this, we've got 2 groups of people that are against Dalton Ward. One is McBain, the reporter, who personally is angry and jealous of him for his relationship cheating with Lily. And the other one is Sonny, Mags, and Victoria and the Coast Club, who have a motive to threaten Ward to stop his temperance movement stuff. Lastly, the items Miss Dresser found in his fireplace, that is the golden pin and the charred note. Remember, the note said, David knows he's gone mad. Come soon. Okay, what is their significance? Well, we know the golden pin is a pin from the Coast Club, and I think we agree that what happened was, and there was some real debate about when this note was burned and when the pin was thrown into the fireplace. We're sort of in summer months, so the fire shouldn't have been running. Why weren't these things burned? They were in his study. I think now the most logical conclusion, we thought maybe did he run into the house to burn them? I think now the most logical conclusion is that when Lily died and the police came to talk to him, and it wasn't clear whether it was a suicide or not, I think that's when our Mr. Dalton Ward sort of reformed, actually had a come to Jesus moment. Possibly. Regardless, it was at that moment where he realized he has to burn all evidence he was having an affair with her. Police came to visit him. They might suspect him being involved in somehow. And I think this is where he realized, okay, this past life has to stop. It's going to get me caught in trouble, whatever. Or maybe he honestly felt bad about Lily. At that point, I think he threw that stuff in the fireplace. Maybe he started a small fire, but it was the summer, so he didn't keep it going. It's his private study, so he didn't worry about it. That's my guess of when it was thrown in there and why it didn't burn completely. Wow, there was something else that just reminded me, though. I've forgotten it now. Someone else had another question that we were going to talk about that I've overlooked. Did it have to do with when he came in? I can't remember now. Let me see in the chat if there are any other questions here. And if anyone disagrees with anything I've said about the answers, now is your time to officially get it on the record what you think happened differently. Debbie says, yes, the diamond was put in by Vesta, intended to threaten rather than kill him. 2, obviously David, but also Sonny and Vesta. They were working together, not confirmed. Golden Pin was the Coast Club. The note was the affair with Lily. We know that. I'd like to hear your votes on when you think he put those things in the fireplace to get rid of them. Veggie Dog says, the only thing I'll say for the record, is I think David wrote the note to lure Lily on the bridge, but he only intended to confront her. He pushed her off in a moment of rage and instantly regretted it. Interesting, although you would think if he wanted to confront her, he would just confront her in his home where he had control over the situation. Why would he lure her out? That's a little weird with a fake message. Jonathan says, I find it weird that McBain seems to be a member of Club Coast. Why would Lily and Dalton use a code that McBain would know? I don't know. It's a good question. Remember, you only have to be at the club for 3 days. It's possible that McBain joined the club after Lily died, specifically to get access to the code. Right? She dies on the 2nd. We're now on the 15th or so, and Sunny Mag says it's a club code and you only have to be a member for a few days. Oh, 30 days. I stand corrected. You have to be a member for 30 days. Okay, so you're right. He had to have been a member before that. It's a good question. Well, maybe that's where he met Lily. So maybe this is sort of the anthropomorphic theory of life on Earth. Lily and McBain are dating. It's very likely they met at the club. So that explains the coincidence of him being a member of the club. Possibly. Any other theories? You must have known the code in order to fake the note. Yes, that's certainly true. Emmy says, I think the theories are broadly right. Maybe 1 or 2 details around the edges might be different. Main answer is McBain killing Lily after luring her to the bridge. I agree. Just a reminder that the way we play games on this channel is we don't limit ourselves to the official questions. So don't feel like because we know the answers to the official questions, you're off the hook for the others. Everyone who wants bragging rights should be trying to answer questions, even questions that aren't asked, that we have. Like, who was Dalton previously engaged with? What's the power dynamics with Vesta? Is Vesta... I'm trying to think of... the word is on the tip of my tongue. She's gone rogue. That's the word I was thinking of. Vesta's gone rogue here in this relationship. And Tina says, I don't want it to be McBain. You don't want McBain to be the killer? He surely killed her. McBain has surely pushed her off. Dalton thinks, Macon thinks Dalton was engaged to both Vesta and Lily. I'm going to try to answer some of these other odd questions. I'm going to say that Dalton was engaged to Vesta prior. He gave her that fake ring, which she made him choke on. She's gone rogue and is extorting him, partially just to punish him for breaking up with her. That Dalton really has at least convinced himself that he's changed his ways after Lillian's death. And that he really has convinced himself that he's on the right side of all this. It was only after Lily's death that he did, though. And that's when he threw the stuff in the fireplace. And I'm going to guess that McBain confessed it to him at that meeting. That's the other thing that you should try to figure out. What did McBain tell him at the engagement party? It seems like for a while we thought he told him, I put the diamond in your stomach, choke on it. But now it seems like there are really only 2 choices. He either told him, I know about the affair and I'm going to reveal it, which is certainly possible. Or he told him, I know about the affair, I'm going to reveal it. Oh, and by the way, I killed her. So I'm not 100% sure on that one. I'm going to guess, though, that he told him he did kill him. He did kill Lily, because Dalton comes running out and says that man's a devil. And it feels to me like you would say that about someone who confessed rather than someone who said they're going to write about you. Another question you might try to answer is who scribbled on the headline in his office that said Temperance March and turned it to Indecency March, turned it to indecency. And I think that that's actually going to turn out to be Vesta putting that headline into his jacket, crossing off decency, writing indecency as her first extortion threat. And if you disagree with any theories that I've presented, you have to go on the official record to make it noted in the chat what you disagree with. If he knew McBain was the killer, he ought to be a lot more scared. I guess you could say that, but Dalton is actually sort of a little manic. Like, he's your typical politician. He's not scared of people. He thinks he's going to use them to leverage his way into higher office. Veggie Dog is saying maybe the butler did it. That was another theory someone had, that the butler understands the notes and knows more about this than he thought. Maybe that was Veggie Dog's theory. I don't think so. So I'm happy to talk about this more. I'm just going to get the letter ready to read here. When we finished, this is our second case we're playing. And I think we should spend some time after we finish and read the solution, talking about the two cases we've played, how they compare, which ones you guys liked best, if you've joined me for both of them. Emmy says, what do we think about McBain knowing about the fake diamond? Is there a closer conspiracy between him and Vesta? It's an interesting idea. It's an interesting idea. You could imagine if Vesta has it personally out for Dalton because she feels jilted, that she's sort of working with the newspaper writer to do this. But the problem with that, it's a funny idea. It's an interesting idea. The slight problem with that, so wait, before I give the problem with that, what Emmy is commenting about the diamond is, I noticed that the newspaper writer said a really interesting thing about something hardening inside if you conceal a secret, it hardens inside you like a rock or something. And it really sounded like it was an allusion to the diamond in his stomach. And so Emmy is saying, if David McBain, the reporter, knew about the diamond, if he was purposely alluding to it, does that mean that Vesta and he are working together to pressure Dalton? It's a very intriguing idea. The only thing that sort of stresses me out about it is that they have very different interests. Like, the reporter wants to expose Dalton for being a fraud, whereas Sonny Maggs and Vesta want to offer Dalton a way to avoid getting embarrassed. So they seem to be operating at cross purposes. David McBain doesn't want to extort him to be quiet. David McBain probably wants to encourage him to continue with his hypocrisy so that he can write about it. So, yeah. And the other thing is, Vesta doesn't need McBain. Vesta doesn't need McBain. He's got nothing for her. Although you could hypothesize that she's angry enough at Dalton that she fed McBain the information about the affair. If you had to ask, how did McBain find out about the affair? Maybe Vesta told him. So I wouldn't rule out the idea that Vesta's not this femme fatale making trouble for people. But I don't know why McBain would be involved in the extortion. John Kingsbury says, I think Vesta revealed the code to McBain. Yeah, I wouldn't put it past Vesta sort of going rogue and feeding McBain information. In fact, Ruth tells Dalton, hey, they've already talked to McBain. They've told him this information to hurt your career so that you don't go into this. So it could have been Vesta, or even Sonny Maggs could have fed information to McBain because they want him exposed as a fraud. The problem comes from the extortion. Why would Vesta or Sonny Maggs be trying to extort him? It's kind of like an insurance policy. They're telling McBain information to get him in trouble, and they're also telling him, hey, stop what you're doing. It's like an insurance policy. But maybe it was Vesta, not Maggs, sending information to McBain about Dalton and Lily. Yeah. It's even possible that Sonny Maggs doesn't even know that Dalton was seeing Lily, and only Vesta does, although I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. Sonny Maggs is an interesting character for me. I don't have a full grasp of him. I'm inclined to think that he's kind of still friends with Dalton. Like, he doesn't see him as an enemy. He's still trying to reason with him. Sort of. And maybe he's not going full extortion. Debbie says, regarding Lily's engagement to David, could it be that she, like Dalton, just wanted a marriage to be respectable? It's a good question. I mean, she may have wanted to be taken care of by a guy with money. Newspaper reporter doesn't have that much money. Maybe she did want the free publicity. Maybe she wanted, who knows? Who knows? We don't know much about Lily's life. We do know that she was cheating on McBain and was trying to get Dalton to come soon, whatever that means. But then Emmy is going back to this theory that Jonathan Warner proposed. Maybe there really was no affair between Dalton and Lily. Vesta made up to rile McBain. Don't forget, Lily... Well... So I was going to say, don't forget, we know that Lily and Dalton were having an affair because of the note that Lily wrote Dalton that he burned that said, David knows he's gone mad, come soon. I suppose you could postulate that Lily didn't write that. That Vesta wrote it. Or even that McBain wrote it. So one interesting thing is, this is something that happens a lot with these kinds of games. That's problematic. So remember that we find these ciphered notes. Now, if you took seriously the fact that the handwriting is the same, that would tell you that actually this note to Dalton saying David knows he's gone mad, come soon. Like, if we are to believe that these were handwritten and they look so similar, you would conclude that actually, if this is a forgery by McBain, this must be also. But remember, the channel is saying maybe Vesta wrote that note and it's pulling all of their strings. That doesn't quite work. Because this was written in McBain's notebook. I think it's all but certain that McBain wrote the note to Lily pretending to be from Dalton. But now, if we take seriously the handwriting being the same, do we then have to conclude that the note to Dalton saying David knows he's gone mad, come soon, must we now assume that actually that was also written by McBain? It's confusing because we're told these messages go back and forth to the club almost as if someone else could get access to them. Ruth transcribed these notes. That's why the handwriting is the same. Okay. Okay. All right. Well done. Okay. All right. Very well done. Emmy said it first. Jonathan is drawing my attention to it. Okay. Great point. So these aren't being traced by our letter writer. They are being transcribed by Ruth, the letter writer. Emmy said it first, so Emmy gets credit. Okay. Okay, that's a relief, because that would have made things complicated. All right, well, then let me just say this. When you're working a case with handwritten letters, you need, Holmes should have written her back and said, I need you to trace those letters or bring it to a photographer to take a photo, because I can't just have you transcribing it. I need to be able to look at the handwriting. Like, that's a crucial piece of evidence we're missing. But as was discussed in the chat earlier, this is a pro bono case from Holmes, and when he gets a pro bono case, unless it catches his fancy, he just sloughs it off to one of his helpers, which is us. So I guess he's not that concerned with the details of it. Debbie says, I don't understand why Vesta would fake an affair. It wouldn't help blackmail Dalton if it didn't exist. Yes, all true. Okay, but we've resolved that. All right, are we ready to open this up? Any last theories before we do? Any last questions you guys want to look at before we read the official solution? What is everyone drinking? What do you guys drink when you sit down? When you sit down to watch these streams, what are you guys doing? Do you have your full meal of snacks in front of you? Are people drinking tea and coffee, soda, water, alcohol? What is it? Let's hear how people... Are you off doing chores while you're watching these streams? Let's see what we've got here. Debbie says herbal tea. Rob says drinking Pepsi Max. Isara Alabaksh We lured someone out of the background, says caramel tea. Okay. The tea I drink here is a tea that I had at Greg's house called, it's Twining's Christmas Tree. Christmas tea. It's in this green box. It's the only tea I drink now. It's a black tea, but it's really good. Visible Man says I'm actually doing yoga at the moment. Can we get one more person out from the background who's never said anything to volunteer what they're drinking? All right, no one's eating snacks while they're watching. Just drinking. All right, one more comment. Veggie Dog says, cooking potato, egg, tomato, toast breakfast, but for dinner. Okay. All right, so let's take a look here. So we've got 4 pages that include the cipher key at the end. Okay, and it's from Holmes. So Holmes has come back into town. He's decided this is how Holmes works. Like, we've had a month to work on the case. He's like, I'm back. I got 20 minutes. Let me solve this case quickly while I'm having my breakfast. Okay, 21 of May. So he's taking his time. Our case started on 12th of May, and now it's the 21st. Here we go. From the desk of Sherlock Holmes, 221B Baker Street. I think it's Holmes writing us, not Watson. Yeah, Holmes. Okay. Miss Dresser, please accept my compliments. You have demonstrated more than a modicum of detective skill, which has served you and the society well. In a short amount of time, you have helped Watson not only decipher the coast code and ensure the safety of your fiancée, but also assure justice for Miss Lillian Newton, who was indeed the victim of murder. Your suspicions that your fiancé was being threatened and that he was only being partially honest were spot on. I am told Watson has apprised you of the current circumstances. It is fortunate he was able to alert the police so swiftly. Even so, I surmise you will be wondering how I came to a conclusion regarding this case from afar. The answer is simple. Your letters provided me with all the knowledge necessary to see the truth behind your fiancé, Miss Newton. Miss Newton, her murderer, and his motivations. The tale of Mr. Ward's initial visit to the hospital, which marked the beginning of this investigation, was itself concerning. It was obvious from your first letter that something was making your fiancé ill, if not harming him, and although that does not necessitate foul play, his career, the gathering you had described, and your following discoveries all cast a suspicious light on his sickness. As you well know, Miss Victoria had hand-fed Mr. Ward something at the gathering, and beyond that, he had spent the afternoon eating food from the luncheon, which most of the guests, as well as his valet and the other staff, could have accessed with ease. If someone had wanted to poison your fiancé by means of food, they would have had ample opportunity to do so. And in spite of these dubious circumstances, your fiancé claimed to be unbothered. His reaction to your inquiries and the strange note and golden pin in his hearth made plain the fact that something was amiss. I was able to confirm this with your second letter, which is what first made me consider the possibility that this was, at least in part, a murder investigation. When you wrote to me on 16 of May, you reported your conversation with the editor of the Daily Mirror, Dennis Hachette. He told you that David McBain, shortly after the death of his fiancée, had requested to write about your fiancé and his campaign. In that same letter, you wrote that an inspector had visited Mr. Ward and that Mr. Ward claimed it had been, about some poor woman I barely knew. The timing of the inspector's visit to your fiancé suggests the poor woman was in fact McBain's deceased lover. And upon noticing this, I knew there was more to the supposed grudge between Mr. Ward and this reporter. Still, was their conflict the root of your fiancé's illness? Your second letter verified that his illness had been brought on by the ingestion of a counterfeit diamond. This made the case for foul play stronger, though it did not directly support a case against any particular individual. I first theorized that Mr. Ward was our culprit. If he was somehow involved with the death of McBain's fiancée, then perhaps the reporter was seeking evidence of his crimes. Considering your interview with Sonny Maggs, it was plausible that he and Miss Victoria were collaborating with McBain, and that they too knew something unsavory about your fiancé's past. On the other hand, I thought your fiancé and McBain might have been feigning their rivalry to obscure a plot together. These were only two of countless possibilities at the time, so I focused on deciphering the coded message until receiving your following missive. Your third letter of 17 May allowed me to finally interpret the Coast Code, which in turn greatly narrowed the scope of my investigation. With the two new messages in hand, deciphering the code was but a quick exercise. I will explain further at the end of my letter. And with all three messages translated, and your account of McBain's tormented appearance and demeanor, the case against him seemed all the more likely. The coded scrap of paper you first fished from Dalton's hearth read, "David knows he has gone mad, come soon." I posit that this note was sent by Miss Newton. The other message you found, partially embossed in McBain's notebook page, read, "Lily, wait for me tonight on Blackfriars Bridge, Dal." Finally, the short message on the florist card in Mr. Ward's sick room read, "Careful, or all will know of L." At this point in time, I theorized that Mr. Ward had once shared a relationship with McBain's now deceased fiancée, and that this was the source of strife between the two. Mr. Maggs, I surmised, was aware of this ongoing drama to some extent and was threatening your fiancée to protect Club Coast. What eluded me still was your fiancé's true part in all this, and the extent of Mr. Maggs and David McBain's connection. Fortunately, any ambivalence I had regarding Miss Newton's murder ceased when I received your last letter, dated 19 May. Due to your diligence, we were then in possession of the newspaper story about Miss Newton's death, which mentioned neither suicide nor her supposed fiancé, David McBain. McBain's editor said he assumed their engagement and Newton's suicide mostly because he had seen the suicide note. However, knowing that the note was written on yellow paper, like that of McBain's notebook, and that it consisted of nothing more than a short part of a Robert Burns poem, I found it difficult to overlook the Daily Mirror's star reporter. As for your fiancé, I do not doubt his present loyalty to you. But I do maintain the position that he is not telling all as it concerns his past with Miss Lillian Newton. Mr. Ward must have either received her note too late or decided not to come to her aid for fear of another scandal in his life, but in either case it appears he bears guilt for Miss Newton's death. The fact he burned her note rather than tossing it strongly suggests there was more than a passing dalliance between the two. But I fear that is a territory you must navigate with Mr. Ward yourself, Miss Dresser. With regard to McBain, it is clear he was envious of your fiancé and of his past with Miss Newton. I believe he used the note you found traces of in his notebook to lure the unfortunate Miss Newton to Blackfriars Bridge on the evening she met her death. Now blinded by grief, guilt, and jealousy, McBain blames Dalton for Miss Newton's death. Returning to Sonny Maggs, I believe he was caught in the same quandary as you and I. He knew that Dalton Ward was implicated in Lillian's death in some fashion, probably because Dalton and Lillian were observed spending time together in Club Coast, perhaps in intimate situations. It didn't matter to Mr. Maggs if Dalton's burning of Lillian Newton caused her to commit suicide, or if he murdered her to keep their relationship from being revealed publicly. Any news of their romance would have ended Dalton's campaign and engagement to you. Maggs attempted to use this knowledge to blackmail Dalton and keep him from moving ahead with his march for decency to Club Coast's front door. Although plans for the march were hardly a secret, I suspect Maggs learned of Dalton's plan from McBain too. I say this because you reported that Miss Victoria mentioned someone tipping her off about the counterfeit diamond, and referencing the tipster as Davy. What? We did? We'll have to look for that. McBain had a good reason to cast aspersions, if not suspicion, on Dalton. Maggs cleverly attempted to pressure Dalton by sending lilies, the flower of choice for funerals and one that echoes the dead woman's name. Now, let me honor your request that I reveal how the clever Coast Code was broken. As you know, this code omits spacing and punctuation. That, together with utilizing 3 or 4 letter blocks, makes it extremely difficult to guess words, which is part and parcel of deciphering a substitution cipher. However, this does not eliminate trial and error guessing. At the risk of boring you with the minutiae of my process, I initially focused my attention on the beginning and end of each of the 3 coded messages, because communications often begin or end with the name of the person to whom the message is being sent, or the name of the person sending it. As it turned out, this was true in 2 of the notes. The one McBain used to lure Lily to the bridge, he signed it DAL, and the very first note on the charred scrap began with the same 2 symbols. I guessed those letters might be D and A in Dalton or David. So I had fortuitously decoded 2 letters, and once I had deciphered 12 or 13 of them, I began guessing words to try and interpret them all. As I previously relayed, the first thing to observe about any code is letter frequency. The most commonly used letters being E, followed by T, A, and I. And once again, focusing on patterns, I would suggest looking for double letters, the most common being LL, followed by EE, SS, and OO. After this, I search for frequent 2- and 3-letter patterns that normally appear more than once. For example, TH as in the and these, SH as in share and shine, RE as in remind, and more. Bearing this in mind, short words, especially like those of, to, and the, will begin to appear after some trial and error. This was an arduous process, but given my circumstances and the information at hand, it yielded fairly adequate results. The code comprises 3 different symbols, each of which can be rotated 7 different times to represent a new letter in the English alphabet. I will include a table at the bottom of this letter. Since arriving at my conclusions, I have turned over the letters you sent to Scotland Yard so that they may have the 3 coded messages you transcribed. However, do not hold on to the originals. Do hold on to the originals. They will surely be needed in the forthcoming trials. In a related context, I have no doubt the truth about this case will come out in the inquest and subsequent trial. Mr. Ward's reputation and political career may not rebound from such a sordid ordeal, but I do hope he is able to continue on his better path. For your part, Miss Dresser, I am confident you will have no trouble rising from these ashes. As it is wont to do, life can take hold and crush our hearts, but in time the pain will ebb, and you will be consoled by the truth of who you are, a strong, courageous person. Well done, Miss Dresser, Sherlock Holmes, consulting detective. And then he's laid out the code. Well, what do you think about this? I mean, essentially, we got everything right, but Holmes left a bunch of stuff unconcluded. He didn't pass judgment on how Lily died. He says, well, it could have been suicide, could have been murder. That's a little odd. It seems to us fairly clear. He set her up with that message. But I suppose Holmes is right. Maybe you could imagine a situation where he confronts her at the bridge and upsets her so much, says he's going to ruin her life, write about her. She'll be ruined. She'll never work again. Maybe she killed herself after that. So maybe we don't know that she's murdered. He doesn't hypothesize about what McBain told Dalton at the engagement party. He leaves the nature of Dalton Ward's relationship with Lily unspecified. He says, surely he's probably hiding something. They clearly had a relationship in the past, but he's sort of ambiguous about how much it was still ongoing. There was a weird part where he described something that I don't think happened. Debbie says, let's check in the chat. Debbie says he did actually say it was murder in the beginning. But then why doesn't he come right out and tell us McBain was the murderer? Did I miss that? Did I overlook it? He says that was what convinced him there was a murder case. Let's see. He says that's when he figured out that McBain forged the note. I see. I guess he's a little ambiguous about it, but here's the paragraph where he talks about it. He says, he burned the note after she died. That's what I was saying. Okay, then he says, with regard to McBain, it is clear he's envious of your fiancée and of his past with Miss Newton. I believe he used the note you found traces of to lure her where she met her death. Now blinded by grief, guilt, and jealousy, McBain blames Dalton for Miss Newton's death. That's very weird way of saying it. And then look, down here. I see. It's just saying that Mags doesn't know if she committed suicide or was killed. But it's kind of weird that Holmes doesn't follow up on this and say... It's weird that Holmes doesn't say that McBain killed her and then blames Dalton for her infidelity, which made him kill her. It's a weird way to say that. But then there was a weird so there's that. So that was weird of Holmes. But you have to realize Holmes is writing this like while he's on the pot. Like he's not taking this case all that seriously. He's not. So maybe we can forgive him. But what was the weird part about a discussion about Victoria's counterfeit ring that we don't remember ever reading? I suspect Mags learns of Dalton's plan from McBain too. I say this because you reported that Miss Victoria mentioned someone tipping her off about the counterfeit diamond and referencing the tipster as Davy. What? Is that something that got cut from the story, or did we somehow skip a paragraph? It seems very hard to skip a paragraph on all the rereadings. I wonder if that's not a bug, like maybe it was in the original letters and they cut it for time. It's clear that these letters, like you can see, letter 4 was just made to stop. So I wonder if it's a case of them cutting something. There is a moment where we're talking to Victoria in one of these letters. What letter was it? She goes to the club. Ruth talks to Sunny Mag. Victoria comes out. Okay, let's read what Victoria says. Yeah, this is her conversation with Victoria. Sunny Mags asks Victoria to show us out. She says, "Sweet of you to visit the club." Went out through a wooden door. I walked away. I think that's a mistake, a bug in the thing, because we didn't hear that from her. And on our last letter, which is the other place we meet her, we don't have any discussion with her, right? She just says the stone was a hunk of glass anyway. And he sends her out. All right, so I think that's a bug. I don't think that is mentioned in this last letter. Get Vesta now. Yeah, we don't talk to Vesta. That's missing. That's not real. So Holmes has got some letter we don't have. All right, but we essentially figured it out and solved it. We answered questions that even Holmes didn't consider. It took Holmes a lot harder. We had a harder time solving the cipher than some of the top people in this group did. He needed 3 letters for it. This group solved it very quickly. This group also didn't mention that it was basically a polybus square, which also comes up in the latest Indiana Jones movie, by the way. Okay. It's a reasonable solution and mostly stuff we figured out, and Holmes is just being a little more cautious than we were. We took a little bit of a leap in some things. Did Holmes even bother to answer the 3 questions? I guess he did, and his solution covered those 3, right? He didn't go into much detail. Don't forget, they're Watson's questions, so Holmes does not feel obligated to answer Watson's questions. So maybe we shouldn't be surprised about that. He does come to a similar conclusion that I did, that burning of the stuff was Dalton's attempt to move along. Okay, so how do we feel about the case? I wouldn't have minded if that letter was went into a little more of the details that we didn't know answers to. It's sort of like, instead of filling in details that we might have missed, it feels like we need to fill Holmes in on some details that he might have missed. So, not that impressed with Holmes, but remember our theory. Remember our theory from the first case is that this isn't the real Sherlock Holmes. And I think maybe this leads credence to that theory. I propose that the real Sherlock Holmes is off somewhere. Someone is getting his cases, pawning them off to amateurs like us, encouraging the amateurs to send back solutions to him, and then he's sending us the solution that he's gotten from others, pretending he's figured it out. So I don't think we're dealing with the real Sherlock Holmes here, which explains why it took him so long to figure out the code and why he's not filling in these other details. And it explains why he's referencing some note that Ruth never sent, because someone has fed him bad information. This is not the real Sherlock Holmes we're dealing with. Let's just keep that in mind. Let's be a little suspicious. Take things with a grain of salt when he tells us something he's figured it out. It may just be to lure us into false conclusions, or this is just a scam. I think this is just a typical Victorian age scam. That's someone's pretending to be Sherlock Holmes to get paid. Like, that's what's happening. We were talking about, he doesn't normally he's taking this case for no money. I think he is getting money. He's just not telling us that. He's pretending he's taking this pro bono, and that's why this whole rigmarole initially with Watson saying he's out of town, I think we figured out we're not really exchanging letters with Sherlock Holmes. Regardless, this is still a real case with Ruth that we solved. The whole thing that Dalton said he was going to turn the tables on McBain, yeah, that's not resolved, didn't come to pass. But Holmes says some of this stuff's going to come out in the trial, etc. All right. So, leaving aside the details of the solution, which were reasonable, and we were right about all the major cases, and maybe we should take seriously the idea that Holmes doesn't like jumping to conclusions that aren't warranted, or the fake Holmes. All right, so what did you think about the case in general, and then compared to our first case? This case feels like the first case we played, which was called what? This was the Fickle Fiancés. The other one was the something CH outrages, the Chalfont outrages. Which one did you prefer better? Which one did you like better? How would you rank them? Rob says, I like the previous case better. At least the scenario, not the solution. This was very vanilla. We basically had it figured out after the first letter. Did we though? I'm going to disagree with that a little bit. I agree with you that the sort of setup and setting of the first case might have been more compelling. It was more perplexing. But I think ME says it better to me, says what I think, which is that the first one felt like they didn't really have a solution to the first one. There were details there that didn't really make sense and ever get resolved. But John Kingsbury says, I preferred the first place. It was more complex. Debbie says, I definitely preferred this one. I didn't like the setup or the solution for the last one. I would say, okay, here's what I would say. I would say Rob says the first one had a horrible solution. Okay, here's what I would say. I would say both experiences have exceeded my expectations for this format of this game. It has been very interesting to get each letter of each case. There's been suspense. There have been mysteries. There have been things that got figured out. There have been occasions in both cases where we got stuck on something or had an initial theory that had to get revised and so on. And I think in general, I've been surprisingly pleased with the experience of stretching a game like this out over a month and the idea of making a game out of just getting letters. So I like them both. I think they're close for me. One isn't clearly better than the other. I do think it's true that with this case, it was mostly a matter of our theories converging and becoming more confident. And at the end, we were quite confident in our theories. Whereas in the first case, there were some bizarre facts that were just too bizarre to have solutions to. And so I think for that reason, I'm not as happy with that first case solution, although the ride was pretty compelling and the setting was compelling, was more interesting. Although this felt more real, more realistic, like a real politician. Both cases give us some interesting pointers on how to structure cases and solutions, perhaps what not to do. I enjoyed this more than the first case. Story is more engaging. A little disappointed in how vagueness of Holmes' solution. John says Holmes was on autopilot, the fake Holmes. I do think this one had some... I'll tell you what I really liked about this one. Let's back up. What I really liked about the first one was how hard it was to reconcile all the facts, to make sense of them, to make sense of the shavings on the lock and why animals were being killed. Like, we had some very bizarre theories, and all the way up until the end, we were searching for that thing that was going to make it all make sense, and it never really did. So that feeling of being unmoored and not knowing the solution was the best part about case one. The best part about case two seemed to be that we very quickly got the basic picture of what was going on, that Dalton was involved in some deceit. But there were some very cool little subtle details that were real clues in case two that case one was missing. Case one didn't really have big clues that we figured out and went, aha, okay, now it makes sense, we figured it out. This one did. This one had some great moments where we were figuring out, what does this note mean? Why did he burn it? Did he rush in? And we had these sort of dual tracks. Like, did he rush in to hide evidence? Has he swallowed this diamond to hide evidence? And we had all these different possibilities, and we started to whittle them down to one. But there were still nice moments throughout it. Like the realization that McBain was setting up his woman with a fake note. That was a very satisfying moment. That moment when, I think it was Rob, said, there's a reason why it's an impression on his notebook and not the actual note. Though that really clicked into place. That idea that, okay, now it all makes sense. Like, now it makes sense why it's just an impression in his notebook, not the full note. It was torn out and given to her. That was very nice. Those are the moments for these games that you sort of live for, when it doesn't really make sense, but you can kind of convince yourself it could have happened this way, could have happened this way. And then someone's like, wait, here's the explanation, that everything clicks into place. So that was quite satisfying. And then it made more sense about what he told him. at their meeting. I really appreciated that. And so that issue with and then noticing that the canary colored letter matches the yellow colored letter in the notebook. We didn't really need that. We had already figured out that he was the murderer, but that was a really nice detail. Both things that the audience noticed that I didn't. And then Emmy points out the first case also had a very weird thing where the letters came in a way that the pacing felt off, whereas this one felt good. In this one, we also had a nice protagonist who was doing work for us. That was fun. Although both cases had that a little bit. And it's actually a clever system that this Dear Holmes uses. When we get written back from Ruth, she says, hey, I did what you said. I went and visited this person. It's almost like they're saying, okay, we're going to make this a game where you tell her actions to perform, but you don't get to choose those actions. They're sort of unseen, but someone is choosing actions for her. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised, and in fact, you could imagine if you were trying to make your own Dear Holmes game, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if the way these cases got written was someone thinks up the case, writes the first letter, and gives it to some playtesters. And the playtesters play it like a game, like a role-playing game. And I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't turn out that the playtesters say, okay, tell Ruth to go ask this question. Tell Ruth to go here. And then that the writer gets those ideas and writes letter number 2. I don't know if that's how it's done, but you could imagine it would be done that way, so that you sort of got your first group that are role-playing it and playing it as a real action-based mystery. And then what we see at the end when we get it is we don't see that those actions are being taken, but they're happening behind the scene. I would have preferred if it didn't have the Burns quotes that gave away more than it should have. I think I agree with Entina there too. I think there were quite a few areas in this case that gave more away than it needed to. But don't forget, that was sort of what we thought the way this system was supposed to work. That you could try to figure out things early on your own, but by the time you got to the 4th letter, a lot of the stuff would be hammered home. Hop says, hey, I really appreciate how you get specific in your post-case evaluations. Much more interesting and helpful than just general comments like, I like it, or it was pretty good. Well, thank you for saying that. Case 1 missed a trick over the missing poker. The second case had the fake note. That's right. The first case did miss some opportunities to give us real clues that we could figure out. It felt like that was true, whereas this case did have them. I liked the idea too that we had this reporter, and then it turned out that they were not knowing what happened with Lillian was the highlight of this case, and sort of figuring out how she met her demise. Don't forget, it's easy to forget, but there were times when we thought Dalton killed her. It took us a while to reach the proper conclusion that Dalton didn't kill her. Debbie says, I take 2 main points away from these cases. 1, the obvious solutions are generally right. We shouldn't overthink things. And 2, we won't always get satisfactory answers to all plot points. Okay, I think that's fair. But that just confirms that the way we play it is the most it's the most enjoyable to try to theorize these answers to things that maybe the game doesn't even know a definitive answer to. If you take Holmes at his word, he's saying, look, we can't say what Dalton's real relationship with Lily was, but it's fun for us to speculate. Rob says, I wonder how difficult this was compared to the previous Dear Holmes. It sure would be interesting to talk to someone who's played the other dozen or so cases that exist in this game before we started. If someone watches this, subscribes to this channel, watches this, that happens to have the old letters. Remember, the way this company does it is they say, we don't recycle letters. It's always new letters. You have to imagine at some point they might as well go back and start sending the old letters to new subscribers who haven't gotten them. There's no reason they're not still valid. I guess their whole thing about being the first to solve it, remember there's a little contest that goes along with this, is gone. I would be very happy to get access to the previous letters. If anyone watches this channel after, not live or now or whatever, and has been a subscriber for a while and has the old letters and they haven't marked them up, I would be happy to trade or buy them so that we could play through some of these old cases. And also, I'd like to hear an answer to Rob's question. How did these cases compare to previous ones? Are they more difficult, less difficult, different? Remember that different authors write these different cases, so they may vary quite a bit. Must be very difficult coming up with new cases each month. Yes, I would think it would be. It helps to have different guest writers. How is everyone enjoying this process of playing these once a week on YouTube? I'm finding it quite compelling. I mean, it's quite interesting. It's fun hearing different takes. It's fun to have time to chew on these things and think about them. It's a good time to mention, John says, are the old cases available on podcasts? You're right. The old cases are available on the podcast. I don't know if they ran the podcast audio from the beginning, so there may be cases that they didn't record audio to, but you're right. You could play those that way. Hop says favorite Sherlock Holmes book, Hound of the Baskervilles. We have a crime dossier from Hound of the Baskervilles, do we? What was I going to say? I was going to mention Jonathan Warner's book club. Jonathan Warner, a longtime viewer of the channel, the longest time viewer of the channel, set up a Discord where they're going through chapter by chapter some Fair Play classic mystery books and discussing them. And they're on the second book. The first book was The Red Right Hand, a very weird but compelling and different book. The book they're reading now is called The Poisoned Chocolates Case. How old is that book? And they're up to chapter 2. There's an audiobook of it as well that I'm listening to. It's really quite good. It's sort of a classic Agatha Christie setup, a room full of detectives, amateur sleuths discussing a case. And it's almost like mirrors what we do here. It's different people talking, trying to solve this case. It's really well written, very sweet. Feels like maybe 30s, 40s. Rob says it's The Poisoned Chocolate Case from 1929. Okay. It's not too late. You can get that book public domain if you want. Hopefully Jonathan can give a link to that Discord channel if you want to catch up quickly and join in the discussion. But it feels very much like the discussions we've been having about these Sherlock Holmes cases. It's like, it's very meta because the Discord group is talking about theories, but the whole book is them talking about theories. So it's quite enjoyable. Hop recommends the Agatha Christie book, And Then There Were None. There's a movie about that, I believe. So if Jonathan Warner doesn't post the Discord link in this chat, you can find the Discord link to the Co-op for Two YouTube channel, along with the link to the Board Game Geek section, forum section for this Co-op for Two channel on the About page of the YouTube. And on the Board Game Geek Guild section, you'll find a link to Jonathan's Discord. Or if you just hop in the Co-op for Two Discord, we'll point you to it. Okay, and Tina has shared the link. There it is. Okay. Anyway, I'm really enjoying this book, and you've got some serious detectives in the book and in the Discord channel working on things as well. I had a good time. I'm looking forward to the next letter. Hopefully we'll get it next week. I like this system. I also am enjoying thinking about the nature of game design for these play-by-mail games, how they're different from the standard Sherlock Holmes games and what you get from forcing the game to slow down. And maybe we will be able to spend more time and develop a better picture of what works, what doesn't in this format. I'm very curious about it. And so I'll see some of you sometime this week when the new Deadbolt Mystery Society puzzle game, escape room game box comes. We'll probably play that on the channel. And yeah, had a blast. Good work, everyone who figured stuff out. Good work with the theories. Thank you for keeping me company. I enjoy the conversation. I enjoy the theories. I'll see you next time. I'm trying to, I have to remember to get my foot ready to end the stream. Okay, I'll see you next time.